Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for giving me the opportunity that I can show some real practical application of my research. So that practical application of my research is a course that is training students who will engage China in the long term. So that may be Western students here from the US. It may be students of Chinese origin who spent a long time here in the US and see business opportunities with China, or students that are surrounding the sphere of China and like to get to know more about it. So that course is basically very practical for crisis management because we have very different kind of approaches to reality. And while in the practical, it's quite easy to resolve those things, in the legal sphere, in some more conflicting situations, it requires a better understanding of one's own and the other place's position in order to prevent huge misunderstandings and missteps. So this course is preparing students who will have this long-term engagement with China. This course has emerged from my research in Jesuit education, which also has a very long tradition, and where I found that this very characteristic way of how that education system works is very applicable to the current situation in the Chinese educational system. So the technology, so the approach or method about engaging this very different culture from the West is also derived from theological studies. So that method comes from comparative theology. So all those different bits and pieces are put together in this more practical application, which is what we're teaching at the School of Foreign Service, where we're teaching doers. So not so much academicians, but people who will actually engage and concretely solve and address issues. So in my research, I found it very interesting to see that in China, there's a very fast development. And in order to keep up with this huge economic progress, there's also the need to train people. So to offer higher education, better skill sets, more comprehensive knowledge, because here China is moving from this initial cheap production country to the higher end and into the research and knowledge-based industry. So to propel this progress, to sustain it, also universities, high schools, the entire education system needs to keep up with it. And I found that there was basically a certain neglect. So on the one hand, the training for skills is very well developed, but there hasn't been any effort or not too much effort to also integrate the values, traditions, virtues that are there in the very long, millennia-long tradition of China. So in the classical Jesuit education, both of those two things have already been merged. So already in the 16th century, this was the new approach of Jesuit education, to have both. So to have a training for skills, knowledge, for some practical applications. So to become a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, a technician. And at the same time also train the person, so offer a holistic formation. So not just the brain, but also the values, the perspective on life, being able to find some ethical ways of addressing issues. So in short, to have both some academic education, but also a humanistic education. And when I looked and combined those two situations, I actually realized that in China, there's already one part really there. This is this high push for high performance academic careers, skills, knowledge, while that other part seems to have been neglected. Even so, it had been present. It is part of traditional Confucian humanism. And that Confucian humanism here, as Professor Wang has mentioned, has been already discovered long ago, over half a millennia ago by Ricci, as something very similar to the Western humanism, so the classical Aristotelian Greek and Roman culture that has expanded here in the West. So there's a strong comparison between the two, which then led me to actually propose some new way of offering education as a way of addressing that current issue in Chinese education, where there's a neglect of that virtue or holistic formation. So that Jesuit style of education actually helps to combine both the ancient traditions that are local to a certain culture, as well as the need to be practical, to be applied, to be knowledgeable, to be up to date with modern technology. So for my own Western perspective, this exploration also gave me some huge insights. So it's very traditional that in the West, we like to be occupied with the transcendent, with what may be next, the heavens, with God. And we at times lose track of the pragmatic, the practical, what's happening right now. And here I found that Confucianism actually offers a great resource. So there has been, it seems, less emphasis on the speculation, the transcendent, and more emphasis on the concrete, or what we call in the West, the secular. So for my own research, I find it very interesting how that Confucianism can sort of infuse into that more transcendental system of spirituality of the West, that more pragmatic orientation that has this millennia-long tradition in China. So there seems to be some very interesting mutual exchange or even some complementarity that can emerge if people are willing to actually fully engage two very different cultural systems. And when people are willing to realize that, in the pragmatic, the concrete, it doesn't matter so much from which kind of cultural system you're coming from, but you can actually work together to resolve some concrete and very burning issues. So this has been the kind of nexus, the starting point for that course that I designed. It is that notion that in order to interact with one another, there is a need to also understand one another. Otherwise, it becomes some sort of pushing one's own position towards the other, or even bullying or overrunning the other position, which eventually will not work out. There will be some pushback, some conflict, and the situation will boil over. So this is not what is very helpful. It will not foster economic development. It will not help for political stability. It will not provide a basis that two very different large countries like the US and China will be able to coexist to find their new positions, especially now where there's no longer just a bipolar or monopolar moment, but that there are multiple large countries who will be part of that new system, that multi-polar system. So it is in this context where I designed this course for those who will work at that interface, especially between China and United States. And that course is based on that understanding that in the pragmatic, there is a very good way of interacting with one another. This has been described before. So diplomats who worked there for decades realized, so just from their own experience, once you focus on the practical, you can actually address things constructively. If you begin figuring out some kind of more abstract roots or the anchors of those systems, it can become very complicated. So most of those practitioners, they did not have the chance of exploring one another position. So neither the Chinese side nor the Western side. They have short postings in the other countries, and they just got that practical information. Here, stick with the concrete. That's what you can work out. Don't wonder too much about what's in the background, what's the kind of values, virtues, what's really so important for the other position. So, and this is where my course is filling in. So I'm trying to illustrate that there are different perspectives how to describe reality. So I use there, for example, the different approaches of science. So in the West, we're very famous for some intervention medicine, which is based on actually really zooming down, categorizing what works, what is not healthy, what kind of drug is actually concretely triggering some cause and some effect. This is a very different approach when you look at traditional Chinese medicine that's very holistic, that considers the person as integrated, being part not just of family, environment, but even the entire universe. So a constant flow of interaction, which gives this long-term caring for the well-being of the person. So already here, my students then realize here, both of those perspectives have some concrete value. So the Western medicine for this emergency intervention, while here well-being, some longevity, some very good and fulfilling life can be supported by that more traditional Chinese medicine. So that there are different kind of approaches will then also be reflected in when we look at different ways of organizing society. So we look at how the Constitution, the values have shaped here the United States, and in which way the traditions, the history, the conflicts have shaped what is now today China, and what kind of challenges have then now left some strong marks in the Chinese society. So here we got very lucky because more recently, there are a lot of documents that have been translated by the Chinese government into English. So there are a lot of speeches, positions actually available. And it's very interesting for the Western students to explore those kind of positions. Also for those students who are surrounding China to explore those official pronouncements about how here the Chinese government is projecting to develop society, democracy, the economy, and international relations. And from there, we're looking at the economic development of China, which then becomes more an example of that pragmatic interaction. So the International Monetary Fund is working since decades with China, and it's a very successful and fruitful enterprise. So the renminbi has internationalized, has become one of the drawing currencies, which is the highest grade for any kind of currency that's in the market. So like the dollar, for example, or the euro. So there has been huge successes when both sides are willing to realize that they have differences. So there are different ways of organizing the economy in the West, in the East, but in that pragmatic interaction, there can be great outcomes when both sides are willing to collaborate. So from there, we also look at some more traditional text in strategy, realizing there are different ways of here looking at issues that emerge when two states are in conflicting positions. And in order to be able to better understand one another, it's also good to have that historical perspective, realizing that it is not just in medicine where there's a more holistic perspective on issues, but also when it comes to the perspective of looking at society, when it comes to look at conflicts, that there requires to be the knowledge that in China, there's a more comprehensive, a more complex approach, and that it cannot always be the direct way that we prefer here in the United States. So my course that I'm teaching there is designed that people will be able to handle that tension, that there are two different systems. Like in philosophy, there are different ways of approaching reality. In science, there are different ways of approaching reality. And this plays out in how society, how politics is formed, and that people who are willing in really understanding the other position will become much more capable of handling conflicting views, and then become also much more efficient managers, diplomats, or businessmen.
Father Wagner, I thank you very much. That's a very helpful introduction to what I think must be a very stimulating course for your students, especially if they have to negotiate, as you say, that space of interface between different cultures. If you have some questions about this approach and its applicability, then for people who will be teaching Chinese international students on US campuses.
I want to go first. Oh, okay. Thank you. So you have talked about the, like this, how to train students from China and US, in terms of the relationship between these two states and all. So I'm very curious, interested in hearing. So does your background in Europe have any role to play in this relationship? As you also mentioned, like now it's not really a bipolar um,
Yeah.
like world, but Europe definitely is a very significant force in the landscape of culture and and politics and everything. So
Sure.
could
And
you?
as you have mentioned, so Germany has very long-standing relations with China. And then there's the question, yeah, how does this come about? Why is it not with other countries? So this is part of the curiosity of the students, that is realizing that it's not just the mind or just some very quick fix in our business, but that there is this sort of set of values that is influencing our decisions. And a crucial part is realizing that there are different ways of valuing certain things more or to a lesser extent. So the challenge for the students who are participating in this class is that it's not as easy as just sort of learning China or having some textbook that you can then follow, like you're cooking a recipe. So it is much more challenging to one's own position, because they also need to figure out what is important for them, what the crucial values are, and respecting that what they are choosing may actually be different from what somebody else can choose. So in other words, if a student takes the freedom to choose a certain set of values, that also implies that another student can choose a different set of values. So this is where basically the realization comes about that there will always be some little bit conflicting perspectives on certain things. The other part of the course is realizing, yeah, that human nature, that was, Joseph Chiang is teaching, is not totally different. So pragmatically, things can be addressed. The overarching theme then is to become more transparent or aware about how different cultures, so this is a big term, are actually engaging with some pragmatic difficulties, and valuing that there are different kind of backgrounds that allow for a little bit of different interpretation of certain things. So it basically makes people more willing to accept tension instead of considering that, okay, if we just sit long enough, it will just resolve everything. So with this course, there will be the realization that similar as in religion, so some people are following Buddhism, others Hinduism, others Christians. And if I just declare everybody needs to be Christian, then the others can also declare everybody needs to be Muslim. So that doesn't get us any further. So we'll need to stay in this tension and negotiate it and realize that at times there will be some friction that rubs us the wrong way, but it's also for us a possibility to illustrate why we took that position rather than another one. So to become more conflict aware and able to stand that conflict, that's basically a big purpose of this course.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for the Wagner. It's wonderful. I think your second Adam show, Ronnie. Ronnie, on the mic is Materici too. So yeah, Ronnie, very important because you are training the future diplomats in China or for global community. I'm writing some article research for La Civiltà Cattolica. So there are so many different issues arose from the relations between China, US, and Europe in the, well, not past century, but even past decade. And I know you're taking a wonderful and even tough task. My question here is, there are people raise many different questions, or even misinterpretation about country relations, and personal to communal to social to global to international. And as a Jesuit professor and also as a professor for training the future global peace, ambassador peace. So how do you really try to promote in a light of a theological tradition, a Christian tradition, to promote this kind of peace dialogue? Yeah.
Yes, so in theology, I think for each of us, the big quest is for meaning of life, to find God, this ultimate goal and foundation of who we are. And a little bit more pragmatically for this class, it's maybe not such a far stretch, but a more concrete approach, and simply realizing that it is crucial to have some proper information, or in this case, to not just take some secondhand news that may come from some TV station and consider that as the great insight of how to base negotiations on, but actually spend that effort of looking at the other business partner or the other government's position to evaluate, investigate what's behind that, the kind of roots, the deep traditions, the histories that build up that position that's there. So basically to spend that additional effort to understand how a position has been formulated, and not just so learn the language in order, that like a Google translation, I can sort of pass on what I like to say, but that I may even understand how that language is functioning, where it's rooted to, what kind of structure or ideas are behind it. And then similarly, when somebody proposes some negotiations, realizing which values in those propositions are really important, which are crucial, which are in some sense untouchable and cannot be changed. So in short, to become more efficient in how to engage with different cultures. So it's about here encouraging to take that additional step of really understanding the other position on their own terms, which is what comparative theology is inviting to do. So not just looking at something, but making sure you know your own position, and then look at your own position from the other position, which can be very challenging because some people who are not careful, they may get confused on which on which side they are, or getting crazy if they try to combine too much. So this is a personal challenge. On the other hand, it's also fascinating because it allows to see yourself from a different point of view that gives you even some personal enrichment. That's a nice side effect from this kind of way of proceeding.
Thank you. Great.
Fantastic. I had one question or comment myself. Father Wagner, it looks like you've devoted considerable attention to this question of how you negotiate hermeneutic boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
People live in one framework and they have to deal with people who are operating in another framework. In the modern world, how you unite practical skills, excellence in education, in a practical sense, in a professional sense, with humanist formation. And then you said in China, there's a deep humanist tradition in Confucianism, but in the modern world today, the Chinese are emphasizing practical skills and excellence. So we have practical skills and humanism in China, you mentioned them, and then in the West and in Jesuit education. And I was thinking, wow, we're going to talk about how humanism can be the meeting place. And instead, we were talking about how solving practical problems can be the meeting place. But I'm wondering, as a Jesuit and as somebody who is, I would describe myself as a humanist sociologist, somebody who wants to employ sociology to reflect on this question of humanism, of what it means to be a human being, of human formation, of community. Is it possible that we can make those things a meeting place for people from the US, from the West, and people from China?
So the meeting place to which my class is designed is in some sense already given. So one part of the class is looking at how the US has been engaging for the last over 200 years with China. And there the meeting place is business. So in the United States, we like to have good business, and China since ever has been a great marketplace. But as you may then see, when you look at the history, there's some friction that comes along, and that requires a deeper understanding of one's another position. So this is some sort of the starting point why it's not humanism where people meet. So it was not some friendly people who just enjoyed traveling and saw some beautiful new cultures and started talking. So I think this approach would be very fascinating, to have that deliberately a university, maybe a small academic institute, that you would have just this humanistic exchange. So the real ivory tower. So people who can just chat with one another and exchange the grand ideas, because the way the different systems describe the human person is not only different scientifically. There are also some different aspects in Confucianism that differ from how, the Western perspective sees the person. Maybe just one highlight there. So especially in the US, we like that individualism. So each person is their own little universe in some sense, independent of everybody else, ideally, which is very different from that classical Confucian understanding that you live together, that a human person is part of a web of interactions. So already there, humanism becomes probably a term that's too abstract to hold both of those approaches, but it would be a fascinating way of seeing how I think both of those ways of describing a human person identify different needs, because on one hand, we like to be individuals, so kind of a very specific person. On the other hand, we also not that monad that's just floating around in an ocean of nothingness. So we also realize that we like to have this community. So now the COVID pandemic is, I think, a great example. So you need both. You need to take care of yourself, but you also need to take care of others, which is a classical Christian value. So love your neighbor as yourself, which is also not too different from the Confucian formulation. So don't do to somebody what you don't want to have that person to do to yourself. So there is a certain overlap, but I think it is not so easy that you just bring them together and start the mixer, and then it gives just this harmonious flavor and stew. And to me, that's also the fascination, that you can have different approaches, so that the paintings, that the perspectives on lives, they're not just all the same. So yeah, a Big Mac or a cup of Starbucks coffee that may taste literally everywhere the same because it's just standardized, but it also lacks the kind of nice flavors of Chinese cuisine where you have hundreds, thousands of different flavors. So I prefer to have that difference intact. And then maybe that kind of place that you suggest, so the ivory tower where everybody knows this is, that people may not be that practically applying what they're thinking about, it would be a great place of getting to know one another, exchanging ideas, and maybe just having suggestions or an example that it's possible, even though there's some very different perspectives, how we see reality, that we still can live together and don't need to push each side or one side or the other to have the only one valid possibility. So I think it would be an invitation to actually express, live, demonstrate that it's possible. Yeah, even though we all search for truth, that there may be a little bit a different approach that we can follow in order to arrive at that final conclusion.
Excellent. Well, I thank you very much for offering that perspective. I thank you all. I look forward to continuing our conversation, and I appreciate your very insightful comments adding to our program today. Thank you all very much.